Undercover boss cleans restroom at his own restaurant, overhears manager's shocking secret. Sometimes it takes a humble janitor's hands to rebuild what a CEO's eyes have failed to see. Are we brave enough to kneel before our values and rise for what's right? Morning sunlight slipped through the crystal clear windows of Bolera's table, casting its glow onto the marble floor, polished to such perfection that it reflected every passing footstep. The ceiling soared high above, and crystal chandeliers sparkled like a constellation trapped within the heart of the city. Each chair, upholstered in rich dark leather, and every table draped in pristine white cloth, was arranged impeccably, reminding one of a golden era when elegance wasn't measured by the price of the food, but by how every guest, whether wealthy or humble, was welcomed with equal respect. But today, Bolera's table was no longer that place. The air hung thick with the unsettling scent of walking profit margins, of revenue calculated through every forced smile and cold nod. Behind the dark wooden doors of the back office, Marty Donovan, the new general manager, had just signed off on a new policy, mandatory 20% gratuity on all bills, no exceptions. Her voice was ice cold, her gaze sweeping over the waiting staff like she was calculating missed sales targets rather than seeing human beings. Customers might not like it, but they'll get used to it, Marcia smirked. If you can't afford it, maybe you don't belong here. That's how Bolera's table had changed. Guests were no longer valued for their character or the stories they carried with them, but judged by tailored suits, gleaming watches, or simply a well-polished pair of shoes. Graham Easton, the founder of Bolera's, had stepped away from the limelight years ago, choosing a quiet life in a small suburban home. But he never let go of the core values he built the restaurant upon. They said Bolera's was his life's masterpiece, and yet now, that creation was cloaked in a facade of opulence, hiding the deep cracks of indifference beneath. A confidential report had just reached his hands. Revenue appeared to be rising, but staff turnover had skyrocketed. Complaints from customers were being buried, and the loyal, long-serving waitstaff had quietly left without a word. Graham knew numbers on paper never told the real story. If he wanted to know the truth, he had to see it with his own eyes. On a gray morning, he put on a faded overcoat, fraying slacks, and shoes worn pale by time. His face bore the deep lines of age, his sparse beard making him look like a man long forgotten. Today, no one would see Graham Easton, the illustrious founder. They would only see an old man, weary, his trembling hands clutching a thin, faded leather wallet bearing a name almost worn away by time. He quietly pushed open the doors of Bolera's table, very place where he once dreamed that everyone would be welcomed like an honored guest. And in his heart, just one question echoed. Does that dream still live here, or has it already died? Amidst this dazzling light, is there anyone left brave enough to see the man behind these tattered clothes? And as if fate had scripted it, right here where he once called his second homie a secret was about to be exposed. A bitter truth, beginning from that very first contemptuous glance. Ethan Carter stood motionless inside the luxurious VIP restroom. The crystal chandelier sparkled above, its light reflecting in the marble sink as tiny droplets of water fell rhythmically. Dressed in an old maintenance uniform, rubber gloves darkened by wear, and gripping a mop, no one could have guessed that this man was once the very soul and founder of Bolera's Table restaurant, once celebrated as the pinnacle of elegance and compassion. And right at that moment, through a gap in the door leading to the manager's lounge, a conversation filtered through loud and clear. The familiar voice of Ryan Colleath, very man Ethan had once personally promoted to senior management, rang out, dripping with disdain. We cut their hours, and they still haven't dared to complain. Just as planless bonus, less hours, and the extra money slides right into the special fund. Who's gonna find out? Ethan held his breath. A cold sweat trickled down his back, despite the cool air-conditioned room, but the shock wasn't over yet. Ryan's voice dropped lower, followed by a mocking chuckle. Just keep this going for another 3 months, and I'll have enough to walk away. The old man? He's done, probably retiring for good. Who even cares about those outdated ideals anymore? Ethan clenched his fists, the veins on the back of his hands standing out like harsh reminders of his bitter disappointment. He had spent years building Bolera's Table on one simple philosophy. Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect, no matter what's in their wallet. And now, the very men in shiny tailored suits were the first to trample over that principle. He left that place without a sound, but within him, something had reignited a quiet, unwavering resolve. If I don't stand up to protect what I built, who will? And that very night, not as the founder, but as the undercover CEO, Ethan Carter began planning an unprecedented takedown in the history of Bolera's Table. Under the humble disguise of Frank, an aging janitor with a permanently hunched back and a mop always in hand, Ethan moved through the hidden corners where the glittering chandeliers of Bolera's table could never reach. And it was in those dark corners that the filthiest secrets began to surface. Day after day, Ethan quietly collected hastily crumpled notes, discarded report printouts left behind at the copier. On late nights, when the restaurant fell silent except for the low hum of ventilation fans, he sat alone in the storage room, piecing together scraps of information like a master strategist playing his final endgame. And then, Ethan stumbled upon a discovery that left him frozen. Ryan Cole had colluded with David Lang, the chief accountant, to hide hundreds of thousands of dollars in a slush fund, cleverly disguised under the polished name Personnel Adjustment Expenses. Scattered handwritten notes, shaky but unmistakably clear, read, "Laura, cut her shifts. Asking too many questions about bonuses. Flagged. Divert quarterly bonuses to auxiliary expenses confirmed with David. Ember Sal. Prioritize schedules for the loyal group. Ensure their silence." Outside, Bolera's table still glittered like a diamond at the heart of the city. But behind the scenes were people like Laura, young, principled waitress who always greeted guests with a genuine smile. Just once, she dared to ask about the inexplicable cut in her bonuses. And for that, she was removed from the work schedule. One by one, others like her, those fragile voices of resistance slowly disappeared from the grand, glittering hall. Yet, an underground fire still smoldered. Laura and a small group of younger employees began meeting quietly after shifts in the basement parking lot. What started as hesitant conversations and wary glances soon turned into resolve. But they lacked one crucial thing: a leader, a voice strong enough to shatter their fear. And then, Frank appeared, not with grand speeches or empty promises. He simply showed up right when Laura and her colleagues needed someone to just listen. A well-timed, subtle piece of advice, a small slip of paper showing how to publicly check their shift schedules, or sometimes a mysterious dossier on questionable financial records would just happen to fall right onto their meeting table. Those once confused eyes now glimmered with hope. They didn't know who Frank really was. They only knew that when he showed up, it felt like a way out was possible. And Ethan knew the decisive moment was fast approaching. The cracks were clear in the walls Ryan Cole had built so carefully over the years. All that remained was one final push, and it would all collapse right there in the so-called Temple of Perfection. Ethanas, Frank, was no longer just quietly watching. He had begun maneuvering the board like a master strategist, each move carefully calculated. Every night, after the click of high heels and hurried footsteps had faded from the marble halls, a small group gathered in a dark corner of the basement where a long-broken security camera still hadn't been fixed, simply because no one cared to. Laura was always the first to arrive, carrying a battered old backpack stuffed with a thick file of injustices she and her colleagues had endured. That night, just as Laura began to speak, Frank suddenly emerged from behind a concrete pillar. No one had heard him approach. Only the soft drag of his mop along the cold floor broke the silence, like a quiet herald announcing the storm to come. "You think you don't have any power?" Frank let out a faint chuckle, pulling from his old, worn bag a thin stack of papers, no heading, no official stamp, just undeniable proof of unauthorized fund transfers. Messy, shaky handwriting laid bare every shady transaction. Laura's eyes widened in shock. She whispered, "Where did you get this?" Frank simply shrugged, his voice low but calm. "The things people want to hide, they rarely bother to hide them properly. You just have to look at the right time and know how to read between the numbers." One late afternoon, as everyone was preparing to finish their shifts, Ryan Cole, dressed in his sleek tailored suit and gold-plated watch, happened to cross paths with Frank in the hallway leading to the management lounge. "Frank, you're too old to be wandering around here. This isn't a place for people like you," Ryan sneered, his eyes dripping with contempt. Ethan simply lowered his head, slowly mopping the floor right under Ryan's polished shoes. His voice rasped, gravelly, but laced with hidden meaning. "Old men aren't welcome here, but sometimes it takes an old back to see what young eyes never bother to look down and notice." Ryan frowned, clearly not grasping the full meaning, but his instinct, shown by years of wielding unchecked power, made him walk away quickly. And Frank continued his work, as if that brief encounter had never happened. The very next day, Laura found a small piece of paper tucked inside the menu binder she was responsible for. The handwriting was shaky, but clear, detailed instructions on how to access the internal HR accounting records through a hidden link only management supposedly had access to. At the same time, an anonymous message appeared on the phones of several loyal employees. "The truth doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs to be revealed at the right time." End of quote. Laura started wondering, was Frank just a humble, aging storeroom attendant after all? Or, as her gut told her, was he the final piece they had all been waiting for? With every small move, Ethan silently drove Ryan Cole into a corner. The illegal transactions were being exposed bit by the very people Ryan had always underestimated. And then, Frank held back one final trump card, a signed copy of the slush fund transfer contract bearing the undeniable signatures of Ryan Cole and the chief accountant irrefutable proof for the tribunal that was about to unfold at Bolera's table. The final reveal was now just waiting for the perfect moment. An emergency HR meeting was about to be called, and this time, Laura would be the one standing at the mic, while Frank would sit quietly at the back row, simply watching as the seeds of defiance he had quietly planted finally bloomed. Should he reveal himself as Ethan Carter, or would it be enough for the world to simply see the truth, while his identity forever remains a closely guarded secret? The main conference room of Bolera's table had never been this packed or this tense. The air felt thick with uneasy glances, mixed with overwhelming anticipation. On the small stage where rare vintage wines were usually displayed stood a massive LED screen, now prepared to expose truths no one had dared to confront. The sound of calm, steady footsteps echoed through the room. Each step landed with the weight of impending judgment. From the back of the hall, a man both familiar and strangely unrecognizable emerged. No longer was he the bent, weary figure of Frank, the old storeroom janitor. In his place stood Ethan Carter, dressed impeccably in a sleek gray suit, walking with calm authority. His eyes, sharp and cold, seemed to pierce straight through every layer of pretense in the room. The entire hall fell into stunned silence. Ryan Cole, seated in the front row, froze as if struck directly in the chest. His face drained of color, his hands clenched together, trembling uncontrollably. Ethan stood tall before the massive screen. His voice was deep and calm, yet it rang out clearly across every corner of the hall. Asterisk, asterisk. I once believed that by stepping down from the executive chair, I was leaving behind not just a brand, but a legacy, a place where kindness and humanity stood above all else. But it seems I was wrong. Asterisk, asterisk. He gave a subtle nod. The signal was given. The screen flickered, switching from black to a flood of irrefutable evidence. First, an audio recording echoed through the speakers, cutting work hours, and the staff still haven't dared to complain. Exactly as planned. Less bonuses, fewer shifts. The money goes straight into the private fund. Who's going to find out? The entire room gasped. Some covered their mouths in shock. Ryan's face turned a deep, fiery red then, quickly faded to a sickly pale. Next came the salary slips, projected one after another on the screen, each displaying cold, hard numbers showing the precise adjustments made. In the corner of the screen flashed a chilling transaction note: personnel adjustment expenses, internal code, RC014, asterisk, asterisk. And then came the final blow. The camera footage from the management lounge. Ryan appeared crystal clear on the screen, slouched in a leather chair, swirling a glass of wine, smirking as he spoke. Just 3 more months, and I'll have enough to cash out. The old man's clueless, probably retiring for good soon anyway. A sharp crack broke the heavy silence. It was the sound of Ryan's glass falling to the floor. Ethan stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his eyes locked on the crowd with calm but unwavering finality. Ryan Cole, with all the evidence presented here, you are hereby terminated effective immediately. Your records will be submitted to the authorities for investigation into embezzlement and abuse of power. A security officer approached Ryan with professional courtesy but firm authority, gesturing for him to leave the hall. Ryan struggled weakly, his mouth opening and closing, unable to form a coherent word, before he finally disappeared behind the heavy door. Ethan continued, his eyes shifting toward the chief accountant. Mr. Miller, as the head of financial control, you are immediately suspended to facilitate the investigation. If you still have a shred of integrity, I advise you to cooperate, because covering this up will only make things worse. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Then, like a tidal wave breaking free, all eyes turned toward Lorraine, very woman who had once bravely asked why her bonus had been unfairly cut. For the first time, a genuine smile broke across Ethan's usually stoic face. He extended his hand toward her and declared, Laura Bennett, as of today, you are officially appointed head of employee relations. I entrust you not only with the mission of restoring the true values of Bolera's table, but also to ensure that no one here ever again has to bow their head before injustice. Asterisk, asterisk. Laura stood motionless, her eyes welling with tears. She had never dreamed of this moment, but it was her unwavering conviction and honest heart that had carried her out of the darkness. The applause began hesitant at first, but quickly swelling into a thunderous wave that filled the entire hall. That day, Bolera's table wasn't just hosting a meeting, it was a cleansing, a rebirth from the ashes of corruption. And amidst the roaring applause, Ethan Carter stood quietly, a look of peaceful satisfaction on his face. At last, the light had returned. At that moment, the entire hall fell into a hush. Everyone knew that when Ethan Carter, legendary founder of Bolera's table, took the stage, there would be no safe harbor left for those who had betrayed the company's values. The massive screen behind him began to display more documents, not just salary records now, but secret side contracts signed between Ryan and low-grade suppliers. Each contract bore the unmistakable personal approval code, RC approved. Ethan turned, his sharp gaze sweeping across the rows of executive seats. His voice dropped low, each word crashing down like a hammer against the hearts of those present. Bolera's was once known as the place where every plate served carried a sense of pride. And yet, under these so-called strategies, he lifted his hand. On the screen, images of cheap, smuggled ingredients being brought into the kitchen appeared in stark clarity. Fine dining had become nothing more than a facade. Luxury dishes were now just empty labels, hiding the truth behind compromised standards. You turned that pride into a stain of disgrace. A loud thud echoed through the room. Ryan, his face flushed crimson, shot up from his seat and shouted, "You have no right to expose me in front of everyone. These were executive decisions. Who do you think you are to interfere with our operational strategy?" Ethan calmly stepped closer, his deep, unwavering eyes seeming to pierce straight through Ryan's pitiful excuses. "I am the founder, Ryan, the man who laid every cornerstone of this place, and more importantly," he paused for a brief moment. The room felt frozen in time, every breath held. Before Ethan spoke again, his voice crisp and final, "I am still the largest shareholder, and I have full authority to remove anyone poisoning this institution without needing anyone's approval." Immediately, two security guards approached. Ethan gave a subtle nod. Before Ryan could utter another word, his arms were firmly restrained. The sound of his shoes dragging across the polished floor echoed through the hall, a heavy, humiliating exit, but Ethan wasn't finished yet. He turned his gaze toward Laura, who stood quietly at the back of the hall, her hands clenched tightly, her lips pressed pale. And then, perhaps for the first time in years, Ethan Carter smiled. A genuine, warm smile that lit up the room. Asterisk, asterisk, Laura Bennett, you were the first to stand up and speak the truth, even when you knew it might cost you everything. I have always believed that those brave enough to stand tall in the storm are the very ones most worthy of leading when the skies finally clear. Asterisk, asterisk. The hall erupted. Applause, no longer hesitant but thunderous, relentless, cascading like a wave of long-awaited justice. With tears brimming in her eyes, Laura stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she accepted the official appointment document directly from Ethan's hands. In that moment, it wasn't just a promotion. It was the resurrection of a culture, a symbol that integrity had been restored, and that honest voices would finally be heard. Ethan turned back toward the employees, his voice firm yet hopeful. Asterisk, asterisk. Today, Bolera's table has not only removed those who abuse their power, we have purged the hidden toxins that have silently eroded the values I and all of you spent the last 3 decades building. Today marks a new beginning. Asterisk, asterisk. His eyes swept across the room. The same people who once bowed their heads in fear now stood tall, their faces lit with a newfound hope. And like the final soaring note of a grand symphony, the great hall doors swung open. Sunlight poured through the glass walls, illuminating the emblem of Bolera's table high upon the wall. For the first time in a very long while, that place truly shone again. The lights in the grand hall dimmed, leaving only a warm spotlight shining directly where Ethan Carter stood. The microphone in his hand seemed to grow heavy under the weight of the words he was about to deliver. His voice rose not loud, but carrying undeniable authority, each word sinking deep into every heart in the room. Today, we are not merely ending an era of corruption. We are about to rewrite the very core values of Bolera's table. Silence fell. Everyone swallowed hard, waiting. Ethan raised his hand and pointed toward the large screen behind him, where 3 powerful statements lit up like a bold declaration. Restore all previously cut employee benefits. Establish the Corporate Culture Oversight Board. Launch a direct hotline to protect employee rights. He took a deep breath, his voice rich and resonant, almost like a solemn vow. Asterisk, asterisk. The true heartbeat of a company does not lie in financial reports. It lives in the people, those standing behind the kitchen counters, wiping every window pane and quietly cleaning after long nights. They are the soul of this place. And sick. His eyes shifted to the back of the hall, where the often forgotten employees, the servers, the janitors, the security guards now stood tall, their eyes sparkling with overwhelming emotion. I want all of you to remember this. Ethan inhaled deeply, his words carrying the weight of a lifelong commitment. Asterisk, asterisk. From this day forward, no one shall ever be looked down upon because they stand in a humble position. Because I, too, have stood there. I have listened in silence, witnessed your worries firsthand, and I know your voices carry more weight than any financial statement ever could. The room erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. Yet, what touched Ethan most was the sight of Laura standing there in her modest uniform, clutching her freshly signed appointment letterhead held high, tears rolling down her cheeks, her smile radiant through it all. And when the hall fell quiet again, Ethan delivered his final decision of the assembly. Asterisk, asterisk. I will personally oversee the operations of the Corporate Culture Oversight Board for the next 3 months. And above all else, the first person I choose to stand by my side on this journey is none other than Laura Bennett. Asterisk, asterisk. A gasp of emotion echoed from the back of the hall. Laura's hands trembled as she stepped onto the stage. Her eyes were swollen red, but when she shook Ethan's hand, her voice was unwavering, clear, and strong. Asterisk, asterisk. We will make this right, Mr. Carter, because now, at long last, the voices of the smallest among us are finally being heard. Asterisk, asterisk. The curtains closed on the meeting but opened a brand new chapter for Bolera's tableware reputation was no longer measured by the dazzling glow of chandeliers, but by the warmth, fairness, and humanity radiating from every person. The lights softened, and the hall fell into a tension so thick it felt like a taut string ready to snap. Those who had long been pushed into the shadows, the janitors, the servers, the unseen workers now stood front and center, directly facing the plush leather chairs reserved for the senior management. Ethan Carter slowly ascended the stage. He was no longer the quiet, hunched-over, old Frank. He stood as the powerful CEO, his eyes calm but blazing with unwavering resolve. Asterisk, asterisk. 20 years ago, I stood in this very room, founding Bolera's table from a humble eatery with a single promise. No one here would ever be judged by their appearance. And yet today, I had to disguise myself as the lowest among us to find out if that promise still lives. Asterisk, asterisk. He raised his hand. The giant LED screen flickered to life. The first video played. Ryan Cole's cold, arrogant voice echoed through the hall. Cut their hours and they still don't dare complain. Just as planless bonuses, fewer shifts. The money goes straight into the private fund. Who's ever going to find out? The chilling audio reverberated throughout the hall. Ryan's face turned pale, sweat beating down his temples. The senior managers stared at the floor in shame. But this wasn't the climax. With a single click, a series of damning images flashed across the screen. Payroll records slashed, signed by Ryan and the chief accountant. Surveillance footage showing employees like Laura being quietly removed from the work schedule. Meanwhile, Ryan and the accountant lounged in the VIP lounge, laughing over glasses of fine wine. And this? Ethan's head lifted slightly, his voice sinking into a mournful tone. Is the value you claim to have built? Soft sobs broke out among the rows of employees. A young woman covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Laura stood frozen, her hands clenched so tight they trembled. She had never imagined that the silence she endured would one day be brought into the light so powerfully. Ethan stepped down from the stage, each step heavy with purpose. Ryan Cole. He stopped right before the disgraced man who couldn't even lift his head. Asterisk, asterisk. You are hereby terminated immediately. Your records will be turned over to law enforcement. And I sincerely hope the next time you talk about an exit strategy, it will be from behind bars. Asterisk, asterisk. No one dared breathe. The only sound was the crisp stroke of Ethan's pen signing the termination papers. Chief Accountant Helen Morris, you are hereby suspended pending internal investigation. Ethan turned back toward the entire hall, his eyes sweeping over every face, sharp, resolute, and unyielding. Asterisk, asterisk. But today, I'm not just here to dismiss people. I'm here to give those who deserve it a new opportunity. Laura Bennett, please come forward. Asterisk, asterisk. The entire hall erupted with thunderous applause. Laura stood frozen for a moment, then trembling, she slowly stepped onto the stage. Tears streamed down her cheeks, yet her eyes shone brighter than ever. Ethan took her hand gently, his deep voice calm but resolute. Asterisk, asterisk, Laura. From this moment on, you will take on the role of head of employee care. Your mission is to ensure that no one ever again endures the injustice you once suffered. Asterisk, asterisk. Laura broke down in sobs, but her voice rang out loud and strong. Asterisk, asterisk. I promise I will never let anyone suffer in silence like I once did. Not ever again. The entire hall rose to their feet. Applause thundered not for power but for justice, finally restored. Ethan turned his eyes toward all the employees, his voice deep and emotional. Asterisk, asterisk. From today forward, no one will ever be looked down upon simply because they stand at the lowest position. I've stood there myself. I know what it feels like. And I swear, the voices of the quietest among us will always be heard. More than any financial report, more than any profit margin, they are the true value of Bolera's table. Asterisk, asterisk. This was no longer just a declaration. It was a new beginning. As the soft, fading afternoon light streamed through the grand hall, and the heavy red velvet curtains drew closed on this historic meeting, Ethan Carter walked slowly down the long corridor toward the main entrance of Bolera's table. There was no more applause, only the sound of his footsteps, calm and echoing far and wide like a solemn reminder that true change doesn't start from the podium of glory, but from the lowest places, long forgotten. He stopped in front of the old wall plaque, the very one he and his late wife had once placed there. A table for all, dignity for everyone. A soft sigh escaped his chest. His eyes glimmered, not with the satisfaction of victory, but with the quiet joy that the right path had finally been found again. Ethan turned toward the remaining staff members, still lingering there. They stood together, some who had once quietly scrubbed the floors, others who had only ever dared to dream of recognition. And then his voice rang out, no longer the hollow words of motivation, but a sound that stirred genuine pride from deep within every heart. Asterisk, asterisk. You cannot measure a person's worth by the suit they wear or the title they carry. True value is when the smallest among us dares to stand tall, and those at the highest peaks know how to bow down and truly listen. And the entire room fell silent, as if every word was carved deep into the hearts of those present that day. And as Ethan pushed open the glass doors, leaving behind the glittering lights of the conference hall, he smiled gently and whispered not to anyone in particular, but as if speaking directly to his own heart. Asterisk, asterisk. Some doors only open when we are willing to step down, and some values can only be rediscovered when we are humble enough to pick them up from the very lowest places. And beneath the deepening twilight sky, his steps felt lighter than ever before. One chapter had closed, and a new chapter was beginning right from the very foundation he had just humbly reached down to touch.